Have you ever wondered why the most disciplined people in the world almost never talk about motivation? They don't up every morning feeling inspired. They don't wait for the right moment. They don't need a pump-up playlist, a hype speech, or a burst of emotion to get moving. They simply show up quietly, consistently, without negotiation. While most people are still waiting for when I feel ready, these people have already completed their work. While many scroll through YouTube searching for how to get motivated, they've already trained, studied, built, created. And if you ask them, what's your secret? How do you stay consistent for so long? Their answer is almost never. Because they're motivated every day. They understand a truth most people avoid. Motivation is a feeling, and feelings constantly change. If your life depends on how you feel, then your progress will rise and fall exactly like your emotions. Back in Yamato no Damashii, Japan, there was a concept that separated ordinary people from legends. It wasn't strength, it wasn't intelligence, it was something they called Yamato Damashii. The Japanese spirit, the soul that keeps the body moving even when the mind wants to quit. The force that makes a warrior step onto the battlefield despite fear. The quiet fire that makes an ordinary person do the right thing even when they don't feel like it. And here's the interesting part. The original meaning of Yamato Damashii had nothing to do with war or nationalism. Its true message was far simpler and far more confronting. Duty over emotion. For years you might have been told, find your passion, then it will be easy. Wait until you feel motivated, then start. But if you look back at your life, you'll notice something. Many plans died because you ran out of excitement. Many habits failed because you weren't feeling it. Many dreams remained in your head because you kept reading, learning, researching instead of stepping into the arena. Somewhere inside you, there might be a version of yourself, just like the man in the story we're about to explore. Someone who knew more than anyone, understood every theory, but couldn't take action and was left behind by his own potential. This video is not meant to give you a quick minute motivation boost. It's an invitation, sometimes a harsh one, to face a deeper truth. You may not lack knowledge. You may not even lack temporary motivation. What you lack is a duty to the person you promised you would become. In this journey, life philosophy will guide you through 3 realizations. First, why emotional motivation is a trap that keeps you stuck in the loop of hypert, exhaustion quilt, searching for more hype. Second, what Yamato Damashii actually means, and why it's the antidote to procrastination. Third, how to switch from I want to become to I am the kind of person who. The identity shift that makes action inevitable. If you're watching this, chances are there's at least one thing in your life like this. A project you know exactly how to start but haven't. A habit you build and break over and over again. A promise you've made to yourself every year, and every year it fades. So before we begin the story of Tatayoshi, the man who knew everything but acted on nothing, pause for a moment and answer honestly. What is the one thing you've been avoiding the longest? What do you already know you must do, but still haven't started? Write it down in the comments. Not to impress anyone, but to bring it out of the shadows. Naming it is the first step toward duty. And if you want to walk this path with life philosophy, a path that won't always feel good but will always make you stronger, then subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this video with someone caught in the cycle of motivation, procrastination. Because knowledge without the spirit to execute is nothing more than beautiful words dying inside your mind. Now, let's begin the story of the man who possessed all the knowledge in the world, yet almost took it to the grave without ever using it. The story of Tatayoshi, the man who knew everything but did nothing. Some people are born with every advantage, sharp intelligence, noble lineage, access to knowledge that thousands of others could only dream of. Tatayoshi was one of those people. At 2 years old, during Japan's Heian period, he lived a life most would envy. While other young nobles spent their days drinking sake, reciting poetry, and drifting through the pleasures of court life, Tatayoshi immersed himself in books. He read so much that people joked he had consumed more books than men 3 times his age. He devoured Chinese military texts, studied Buddhist philosophy, reviewed Confucian texts, memorized quotes from ancient sages, learned Sun Tzu's strategies, and dissected every battlefield formation ever recorded. In his mind, ideas all connected seamlessly. A perfect web of theories, tactics, and intellectual brilliance. He understood war as if he had stood on 100 battlefields. He held one dream: become a warrior. Perhaps even a general, who would shape the fate of the nation. But this dream had one enemy: himself. Every morning Tatayoshi woke up determined. Today I begin real training. Today I pick up the sword. Today I sweat like a true warrior. But then he found a new text. a manuscript describing a technique he had not yet mastered, a strategy he had fully analyzed. And once again he told himself, how can I train without understanding everything first? Let me study just a little more. Just a little. Day after day he researched, and analyzed, and when he finally felt ready to take action, the day was already gone. He promised himself, definitely tomorrow. But the tomorrow of a procrastinator is a day that never comes. Within the household, the servants began whispering. The nobles laughed behind his back. Tatayoshi, the warrior of books, careful, he won't kill you with a sword, he'll quote you to death. The cruel part was the teasing. It was that deep down, he knew they were right. He had enough theoretical knowledge to train an entire army, yet he himself had never broken a sweat in the real world. His father, a former military advisor with a stern, battle-worn face, looked him in the eyes one day and said the kind of words that cut any man to the bone. You have the mind of a general, but the heart of a scribe. Knowledge without action is worthless. You are a ghost pretending to be alive. Tatayoshi didn't sleep that night. Every word from his father thundered in his chest. The mind of a general. The heart of a scribe. A ghost. The most painful part wasn't his father's judgment. It was the truth behind it. Years of learning, reading, studying, yet he remained the same man. Weak, hesitant, trapped inside his own head. That night something inside him cracked. Not motivation, but a shame so deep it became impossible to keep living the same way. The next morning, Tatayoshi didn't open a book. He didn't read a single line. He didn't seek more theory. He stood up, walked out of the house, and stepped into the forest beyond his family estate. Not knowing exactly what he was searching for, only knowing one thing. He could no longer bear being the book warrior version of himself. He didn't know it yet, but this walk would lead him to the encounter that would change his entire life. An encounter with a man who did not believe in motivation. A man who believed only in duty. Part High. The fateful encounter with the master who did believe in motivation. Tatayoshi walked deeper into the forest, unsure of what he was searching for. The farther he went, the quieter everything became. So quiet, he could hear the heavy thump of his own heart. The heart of a man who had finally reached the limits of the person he used to be. He moved as if trying to outrun his old self, but the truth followed him like a shadow that refused to let go. The air smelled of damp pine. Sunlight broke apart into scattered shards falling through the branches. In a clearing, he saw a man chopping wood, strong but without any display of strength. His body was built like an old oak trunk, yet every movement was unexpectedly fluid, as if each action was done with complete presence. That man was Sakanosuke, a legendary swordsman who had disappeared from the world many years earlier. Rumor said he once defeated 3 imperial warriors in less than 10 breaths, then vanished into the wilderness without explanation. To most people is a myth. To Tatayoshi, he was everything he longed to be but never had the courage to become. Pure action. Tatayoshi froze, mustering all his courage to speak to a man had only heard about in half-whispered legends. Without looking up, Sakanosuke spoke first. How long have you been standing there? His voice was low and calm. The voice of someone who seemed to sense everything. The trees, the wind, and the trembling young man behind him. I want to learn the sword, Tatayoshi said, his voice cracking as if the words themselves were too heavy to push out. This time, Sakanosuke lifted his gaze. His eyes were sharp, like a blade still sheathed but already deadly. Not threatening, but penetrating. Then he asked a single question, one that made Tatayoshi's blood go cold. Do you want to learn, or do you want the feeling of learning? Tatayoshi froze. It was the one question in the world he feared the most. Sakanosuke set his axe aside and pointed at Tatayoshi's hands. These hands are soft. The hands of someone who has done nothing but turn pages. A warrior is not judged by his knowledge but by his caluses. He stepped closer, speaking slowly. I'll ask again. Do you want to be a warrior, or do you want the feeling of being on the path to becoming one? Tatayoshi lowered his head. He couldn't answer. His silence said everything. Sakanosuke turned away and resumed chopping wood. If you truly want to learn, come back tomorrow at sunrise. Not to talk, not to ask questions, but to do exactly what I tell you. Tatayoshi stammered. But what should I prepare? Without turning his head, Sakanosuke replied, prepare nothing. When you spend your life preparing, you're really avoiding starting. In that moment, Tatayoshi heard the most important truth of his life. The weak seek perfect preparation, the strong begin even when imperfect. The next morning, before the sun even rose, Tatayoshi arrived. He expected lessons in swordsmanship. How to grip a blade, how to move, how to attack and defend. Things he had studied in hundreds of martial texts, but no. Sakanosuke handed in a bucket. Fetch water. Tatayoshi blinked. Fetch water, the old master repeated coldly. Tatayoshi obeyed. He brought back a full bucket, Sakanosuke said. Pour it out. Tatayoshi froze. And do again, so repeated the task 10 times. Water carried from the stream, then dumped out. His sweat fell faster than the water in the bucket. His arms burned, his shoulders ached, his legs trembled. Finally, when the sun had fully risen, Tatayoshi couldn't take it anymore. Why are we doing this meaningless task? I came to learn the sword, not to be a water carrier. For the first time that morning, Sakanosuke looked at him, and his eyes were no longer gentle. You think swordsmanship begins with a sword? He stepped closer, placing a firm hand on Tatayoshi's chest. The sword begins with the body. The body begins with discipline. Discipline begins with duty. If you cannot endure repetition, you cannot endure any path in life. Then he spoke each word the way of a hammer striking stone. A warrior does not forge the sword. A warrior forges himself. That sentence silenced Tatayoshi completely, not out of fear, but because he felt someone had finally exposed his entire truth. For years he thought he was preparing, but in reality he had been hiding behind tasks that looked intelligent but were meaningless. When his arms were nearly numb, Sakanosuke placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. Today you learned your first lesson, not a lesson about the sword, a lesson about duty. Tatayoshi asked quietly. How long until I learn the sword? Sakanosuke answered. When your sense of duty is strong enough, the sword will come on its own. In that moment, Tatayoshi understood. His failures were never because he lacked knowledge, but because he never lived with a duty strong enough to pull him out of comfort. And the path of anyone in the modern world must begin there. Not with motivation, not with inspiration, but with duty. Part Bad Day 2. The collapse of motion and the birth of duty. Day 2 arrived faster than Tatayoshi expected. When he stepped out of his house, the sky was still dark, and a thin sheet of mist covered the ground like a cold white veil. His hands still ached from hauling water the previous day. His body felt heavy, but something else had awakened within him, a restlessness he had never known during all the years he lived only inside theory, inspiration. It wasn't determination, it was the awareness that there was no turning back now. When he reached the clearing, Sakanosuke was already there, standing as if he had never moved since yesterday. No greeting, no questions about whether his muscles were sore. He simply handed Tatayoshi a thick wooden rod. Hold this? Tatayoshi thought he would finally learn a stance or grip. But no, Sakanosuke only said, hold it in front of your chest. Tatayoshi obeyed. At first he felt confident, but 5 minutes later his arms trembled. At 10 minutes, his shoulders felt stabbed by needles. At 12 minutes, his breath grew shallow, sweat ran down his spine, and his legs began to twitch. Gritting his teeth, he asked, this is sword training? Sakanosuke replied, no. This is learning to face your own emotions. Tatayoshi didn't understand. Not yet, but with every passing minute, the meaning became painfully clear. When he reached the point where his arms burned and begged to drop, a voice whispered inside he'd stop. No one is forcing you. No one is even watching. When his shoulders felt as if they might tear apart. Try harder tomorrow. Today is enough. When his knees wobbled, a short break won't hurt you of your whole life. That voice, gentle, persuasive, familiar, was the same voice that had sabotaged every goal he ever set. It was the voice that always chose comfort over growth. Sakanosuke, as if reading his thoughts, said calmly, emotion never wants you to advance. Emotion wants you comfortable, safe, untouched. He stepped closer and whispered, but duty does care whether you feel like it. Moments later, Tatayoshi's arms finally gave out and the rod fell to the ground. He gasped for air like someone who had just sprinted a long distance. Sakanosuke picked up the rod, placed it back in his hands and said, lift it. Tatayoshi shook his head. It don't have the strength. Sakanosuke spoke slowly. So slowly that each word peered into Tatayoshi's fading resolve. No one ever has enough strength. They only have enough duty. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't scold. Yet those words were heavier than any shout. After the standing drill, Sakik pointed to a large pile of firewood. Split these. Tatayoshi swung the axe. The first strike bounced off uselessly. The second nearly numbed his hands. The third managed to crack the wood, but only halfway. The more he failed, the more frustrated he became. The more frustrated he became, the sloppier he grew. Finally, he threw the axe down in anger. Why am I doing this? What does splitting wood have to do with learning the sword? Sakanosuke looked at him long and silently, then asked, when you lose patience, what controls you? When you're angry, what makes your decisions? When you want to quit, what wins inside you? Tatayoshi lowered his head. He knew the answer: emotion. Sakanosuke rested his hand on the axe handle and said, if emotion controls you, then you will never control the sword. A man who cannot command himself will command nothing. He pointed at the pile of wood. when you can keep your mind still through the most meaningless tasks, when you can stay steady through pain, when you understand that the easy things don't make you stronger, but the hard things shape who you become, and then the sword will mean something. Till then it's just a toy. Tatayoshi fell silent. For the first time in his life, he realized he wasn't learning swordsmanship. He was learning himself. And he understood something devastatingly simple. He had never lacked time. He had never lacked technique. He had never lacked opportunity. He lacked the ability to move through his emotions and do what needed to be done. That was why he stayed stuck despite reading hundreds of books. That was why every plan collapsed. That was why he never became the person he promised he'd be. Emotion dragged him backward, effort held him still. Fear kept him small, if placed above all else, could cut through all three. By noon, training ended. Tatayoshi sat by the stream, exhausted, his sweat-soaked clothes clinging to his back. But his eyes were brighter than the day before. Sakanosuke sat beside him and said while watching the water flow, "The day you understand that emotions are clouds drifting by, and duty is the mountain that stands unmoved, that is the day true change begins." After a long pause, he added, "You were weaker than your emotions, but tomorrow be weaker a little less." It wasn't advice, it was a philosophy. Day 2 ended not with victory but with awakening, and sometimes awakening matters more than progress. Part Born, the unexpected lesson from the first wound. Day 3 began with a cold wind cutting through the forest. Tatayoshi stepped into the clearing with sore arms, heavy legs, and a strange calmness blooming inside him. The calmness of someone who finally knew there was no returning to the person he used to be. Sakanosuke was already standing as unmoving as the trees around him. No greeting, no concern about Tatayoshi's sleep, no softness in his expression, and yet strangely Tatayoshi felt reassured with this teacher. Everything was simple. Arrive, work, take responsibility, move forward, no emotions, no negotiation, no drama. Today Sakanosuke held an old wooden bokken in his hand, worn smooth by years. He asked only one question. "Are you ready?" Tatayoshi nodded. The master threw the sword toward him, harder than Tatayoshi expected. He tried to catch it, but it slipped and scraped across the back of his hand, tearing the skin open. Blood began to seep out. Sakanosuke said immediately, "Good." Tatayoshi stared at him confused. "Good because I got hurt." "No," the master replied. "Good because this is the first lesson you'll never find in books." Sakanosuke told him to pick up the bokken. Tatayoshi tried, gripping with one hand while the other throbbed with pain. "That hand is injured," Sakanosuke said. "You will not use it." Tatayoshi blinked, "But master, I'm right-handed." "The battlefield doesn't care which hand you prefer," Sakanosuke answered. "The world does not stop for your pain, neither does discipline." Tatayoshi took a breath and tried swinging with his left hand. Awkward, unbalanced, sloppy. Every swing felt like an insult to his pride. He tried harder and failed harder. The bokken slipped from his hand for the third time. Sakanosuke didn't react, didn't criticize, didn't help. After a long silence he asked, "What hurts more, the wound, the humiliation, or humiliation?" Tatayoshi whispered. "Exactly," the master said. "The wound on your hand is real, but the wound in your ego is stronger. The pain of feeling incompetent, slow, unskilled." He stepped closer. "That is what has held you back for years. The shame of starting as a beginner." Tatayoshi lowered his head, not out of sadness, but because he knew Sakanosuke was right. In books, he was always the smartest one in the room. Here, in this clearing, he was just a novice who could barely hold a sword. Sakanosuke picked the bokken up and shoved it back into Tatayoshi's left hand. "You will swing it 600 times. 600, no less. Don't count with your mouth. Count with your heart." He sat on the grass, silently waiting. Tatayoshi began. The first swings were manageable. The next became uneven. Then sweat dripped down his face, mixing with the blood still seeping from his right hand. His left arm grew numb. His shoulder felt like it was burning. By the 300th strike, he drifted into a half-dream state. Only the sound of the bokken slicing through air and his racing heartbeat kept him awake. At 450, his legs trembled. At 500, his breath came in sharp bursts. At 600, there felt nothing but a quiet, unwavering presence inside him. He stood still afterward, the bokken hanging loosely from his exhausted fingers. His arm no longer felt like part of his body, but his eyes held something completely new. Sakanosuke approached. "You have just learned what most people never understand," he said. "What is that?" Tatayoshi whispered. The master spoke in a voice deep as river water at night. "True strength doesn't come from a perfect body. It comes from a spirit that refuses to stop when the body is already broken. That is what makes a warrior." He placed a hand on Tatayoshi's shoulder. "You just lived through a moment most people run from. The moment when emotion, pride, and physical pain all scream for you to stop, and you don't. And from the ashes of that moment, a new man begins. Day 3 ended. Tatayoshi walked bleeding. His left hand numb, his body drained. But inside him something had sprouted. The sacred stubbornness of someone learning to live by duty, not feeling. And from that moment on, his path was no longer about wanting to become a warrior, but about becoming one. Part Num Day 4. The test of the inner world, not the muscles. Day 4 did not begin with the crowing of roosters or the whisper of forest wind. It began with an unusual emptiness inside Tatayoshi. His body was wrecked after the sword 600 times with his left hand. His right hand was torn and bleeding. His left shoulder felt like it was about to fall off. His whole body felt as heavy as if it were carrying stones. But what worried Tatayoshi the most was not his body. It was the quiet, creeping sense of discouragement rising inside him. A voice whispered, "No one will blame you if you rest today. With a body like this, what can you even do? You're hurting every day. How many more days of this?" He hated that voice, because it was the voice of his old self, the self that had procrastinated his entire life. But today it returned, faint yet persistent. And the scariest part was that it made sense. When Tatayoshi reached the clearing, he found Sakanosuke sitting on a large stone, eyes half closed in meditation. Hearing footsteps, the master opened his eyes. Not a look of blame, not disciplinarity. A gaze that saw. Tatayoshi hesitated. No sword drills, no running. Sakanosuke pointed to the stone opposite him. Tatayoshi sat. "Today, we do not train the body," the master said. "We train the mind." Tatayoshi stiffened. "Train the mind?" Sakanosuke asked. "Do you know why today is the most important of the last 4 days?" Tatayoshi shook his head. "Because today is the day your emotions want to quit the most." He spoke slowly, letting each word fall to the ground and take root. No one quits on the first day. Few people quit on the second. But the 4th day, that is when people misjudge themselves. He looked straight into Tatayoshi's eyes. "This is the day your body hurts the most, your mind is the most chaotic, your emotions the weakest, and is also the day that separates a starter from someone who endures." Tatayoshi wanted to avoid that gaze, but he couldn't, because everything the master said was true. Sakanosuke asked, "What inside you wants to quit the most today?" Tatayoshi thought a moment, then said, "My body hurts too much, master." Sakanosuke shook his head. "Then my mind." "No, then what?" Sakanosuke answered, "Your fear that tomorrow will be even harder than today. That is what makes you want to stop." A blow straight to the heart, not painful but true. He was afraid of tomorrow, afraid of the path ahead, afraid of a suffering that had no end. Sakanosuke continued, "People don't quit because today is hard. They quit because they imagine tomorrow will be harder." He picked up a small stone and placed it in Tatayoshi's hand. "Hold it." Tatayoshi held it. "What do you feel, a normal stone?" "Exactly. But if I told you to hold it in your hand for 3 days straight, you would fear it. Not because of the stone, but because of the thought of 3 days." He smiled gently. "Your body can endure. Your mind surrenders before you even begin." He stood. "So today we will face the thing people fear, their own fears." Sakanosuke told Tatayoshi to close his eyes. "Imagine tomorrow, the day after from now, a year from now." In Tatayoshi's mind appeared endless days of painful listing, repetitive training, stretching into infinity. A weight crushed his chest. The master asked. Tatayoshi breathed heavily. "I see myself unable to endure," Sakanosuke said. "That is why you failed in the past. You spent your life living inside days that haven't arrived yet." He placed a hand on Tatayoshi's shoulder. His voice soft but sharp as a blade. "Today you must learn what all warriors know. No one can endure a year, but everyone can endure 1 day." He continued. "Failures think of the entire journey and give up. Warriors think only of the next step." A long breath escaped Tatayoshi's chest. Something inside him loosened. Sakanosuke concluded. The weak ask, "What about tomorrow?" The warrior answers, "Tomorrow will take care of itself today. We live only today." At the end of the session, Sakanosuke stood and said the final line. "You did not train your sword today, but you passed the most dangerous test of all, the test of the inner world, and you did not run." Tatayoshi bowed, not out of exhaustion, but out of recognition. The recognition that he had just stepped through a door that few people dare open, the door that leads to a person strong enough to survive the days no one else wants to face. Day 4 ended. No sweat, no blood, but it was the day Tatayoshi grew the most, not in muscle, but in mental strategy. Day 5. The moment of collapse and the lesson of true steadiness. Day 5 did not begin with crowing roosters or the rustle of forest wind. It began with a strange emptiness inside Tatayoshi. His body was exhausted after swinging the wooden sword 600 times with his left hand. His right hand still stunned. His left shoulder felt like it was barely hanging on. His entire body was weighed down as if filled with stones. But what worried Tatayoshi the most wasn't his body. It was the discernment slowly rising inside him. A voice whispered, "No one will blame you if you rest today. You're in no condition to train. This pain is pointless. How many more days of this?" He hated that voice, because it belonged to the old version of him. The version that had procrastinated his entire life, and today that voice had found its chance to return. When Tatayoshi reached the clearing, Sakanosuke was already there, holding a fresh wooden sword. Tatayoshi accepted it. Cold heavy today, the master didn't even ask if he was ready. Begin. No explanation, no guidance. Tatayoshi started repeating the basic movements. Sword cutting through cold air, feet pressing into wet mud, breath steady at first, but after only a few minutes his body began to rebel. His left shoulder flared with sharp pain, his right hand burned from the reopened wound, his legs grew unstable, slipping on the muddy ground. He gritted his teeth, kept going, but then a sudden bolt of pain shot up his spine, fast and mistakable. Tatayoshi collapsed to one knee. Sakanosuke walked over, looking down at him like someone observing a falling tree in a stormed up. Tatayoshi choked. "It can't." Sakanosuke replied instantly, "Can't or don't want to." A question that sliced excuse away from truth. Tatayoshi tried to stand again but collapsed once more. The pain was real, not the kind you can power through with gritted teeth. Sakanosuke didn't help him up, didn't soften his tone. He simply circled around him and said, "This is the moment every warrior faces, the moment of collapse." Tatayoshi gasped. "So should I push through it?" Sakanosuke shook his head. "No, today you learn the one thing most people never understand." He crouched down to Tatayoshi's eye level. The difference between a real limit and a fake limit. A warrior is not blind. A warrior must know when to advance and when to protect his body so he fight tomorrow. He pointed at Tatayoshi's back. "This pain is not a test of toughness, it's a warning. Ignore it and you won't last another week." Tatayoshi stayed silent. Sakanosuke continued. "Day 1 taught you endurance. Day 2 taught you emotional control. Day 3 taught you to break your ego. Day 4 taught you to overcome fear of the future." He placed a firm hand on Tatayoshi's shoulder. "Day 5 teaches you the wisdom of steadiness, not blind stubbornness." Tatayoshi whispered, "I thought discipline meant never stopping." Sakanosuke answered immediately, "That is stubbornness. Discipline is the ability to move forward in the right direction, at the right intensity for the right purpose." He added, "Weak men rest because they're tired. Wise men rest so they can continue fighting." Sakanosuke extended a hand. "Today you won't train with the sword. Today you learn what many people spend a lifetime misunderstanding. Stopping is not failure. Stopping wisely is strategy." He helped Tatayoshi sit under a large tree. The rain continued. The wind still cut through the clearing, but inside Tatayoshi's mind something lit up. A warrior is not strong only when attacking. A warrior is strong because he knows when to protect himself from pointless ruin. Day 5 ended with little physical effort, but far more wisdom than any day before it. Pachinmui. Day transformation, death and rebirth. On the first day, Tatayoshi walked into the forest with trembling legs, a mind full of Tao, and a will that flickered like a candle in the wind. But at this stage, the threshold between old and new, death and rebirth, fearful ego and a warrior's duty. Everything had changed. He was no longer a boy trying to train. He had stepped into a transformation, a shedding of the self he used to be. The ancient masters called this process Shindumaru. To die in order to be born again. Weak so, when the body wakes up on its own, there was no voice calling him. No knocking at the door, no one urging to get moving. Yet Tatayoshi woke up before dawn, before even the wind moved through the pine trees. At first he thought it was habit, then he realized the truth. His body now knew what to do. No motivation, no self-pep talk. This was the first unmistakable sign of Ninpo sinking into his bones. Discipline had become a survival instinct. His body led. His will simply followed. When actions become automatic, something strange happened. Sword practice no longer required thought. Breathing no longer required awareness. Balance became natural movement. Flow like water following the shape of the land. Tatayoshi experienced what Sakanosuke once described. There comes a time when the body acts before the mind can think. Not the panic reflex of fear, but the reflex of a warrior. Calm, precise, inevitable. The sword felt like an extension of his arm. The ground felt familiar under his feet. His breath matched the rhythm of the forest. Skill was no longer skill. It had become identity. Day Somiba. Training while sick. His first touch of Yamato Damashii on day 63, Tatayoshi was head-pounded. His body felt heavy, His breath was hot like fire. A normal person would rest. Even a disciplined person might hesitate. But Tatayoshi put on his robe, tied his headband, grabbed a walking stick, and went to the training ground. Not to prove anything, not to impress anyone, not because he was forced, but because his duty. Sakanosuke saw him arrive pale, sweating, shivering, but with eyes sharp and unwavering. He did not praise him, did not encourage smile. He simply asked, "Why are you here?" Tatayoshi replied, "Because if I miss today, then tomorrow I am no longer the man I intend to become." Sakanosuke nodded slightly. "Today you touched something the Japanese call Yamato Damashii, the soul of unbroken righteousness, the spirit of those who do what is right not because it's convenient, but because their heart refuses to choose otherwise." Day 63 was not his best day of training, but it was the day she became someone else. Day Chimui. Keio's declaration. When the old self dies on day 90, Keio, the highest master of Nimpo lineage, peered. No one knew where he came from. No one heard his footsteps. He seemed to emerge from the breath of the forest itself. Tatayoshi knelt. Keio studied him for a long moment, then said quietly, "The child who walked into this forest 3 months ago no longer exists." He placed a hand on Tatayoshi's shoulder. "Your old self has died." Tatayoshi lifted his gaze. But Keio wasn't looking at his weakness. He was looking through 90 days of his becoming. Keio continued, "The person standing here now was born from duty, not emotion." He raised Tatayoshi's chin gently. "What carried you through these 90 days was not motivation. It was your commitment to the version of yourself you demanded to become." Then he concluded, "From this day on, what you do is no longer called training. It is your way of living." There were no flowers on day 90, no celebrations, no drums, only a quiet truth that struck deeper than any victory. A former self had died. A warrior had been born, forged by duty, strengthened by responsibility, and anchored in a spirit no longer swayed by emotion. Part the deep truth. Yamato Damashii never opposes knowledge. It perfects it. At the 100th day of training, Sakanosuke did not teach sword forms, breathwork, or footwork. That morning he simply sat beneath a pine tree and motioned for Tatayoshi to sit with him. No commands, no challenges, only silence. A silence deep enough for a person to hear their own soul. After a long while, Sakanosuke finally spoke. "Do you know why the ancient Japanese studied Chinese books yet still lacked something essential?" Tatayoshi shook his head. Sakanosuke picked up a pine needle, rolling it between his fingers. They gained knowledge, but lacked the spirit that carries knowledge into life. Then he looked at Tatayoshi with eyes sharp as steel. Knowledge without action is only weight inside the mind. It saves no one. It protects no one. It elevates no one. He paused, letting the forest wind finish the sentence he had left open. "And this is what the Japanese call Yamato Damashii, the soul that transforms knowledge into execution. Not against Chinese knowledge, but completing what it could not finish." The Japanese never disrespected Chinese culture. They learned writing from China. They learned Confucianism, Taoism. They learned systems of governance, law, philosophy. They learned almost everything, but something was still missing. Knowledge lit the mind, but knowledge alone does not draw the sword. Knowledge alone does not make a man step forward into adversity. Knowledge alone does not help a person keep a promise in the rain, while exhausted, while every emotion tells them to quit. Knowledge is light, but light does not know how to walk. They needed a spirit of action, a force that turns knowing into doing, turns understanding into living, turns principles into battlefield reality. So the idea of Yamato Damashii was born. Not to oppose Chinese knowledge, but to complete it, to ensure that what is learned becomes strength, not just a heavy stack of ideas sitting in memory. Knowledge is the map. Yamato Damashii is the feet that walk the map. Sakanosuke continued. The Chinese possess wisdom vast as the ocean. The Japanese absorbed that wisdom, but only when the spirit of action awakened did knowledge become power. Without Yamato Damashii, he said, knowledge is nothing more than a promise never kept. Tatayoshi fell silent. Suddenly he understood. For years before meeting Sakanosuke, he had read endlessly. Books on strategical arts, great generals, the spirit of ancient warriors. But he never changed because he merely knew. A warrior is not born from knowledge. A warrior is born when knowledge becomes action, when understanding touches behavior. That is when knowledge truly ignites. Yamato Damashii, the spirit that makes knowledge come alive. The ancient Japanese never belittled Chinese learned it. They built their nation on it. They absorbed every lesson they could. But Yamato Damashii answered a question knowledge alone could never answer. When the moment of testing arrives, who steps forward first? Your knowledge, your spirit. Yamato Damashii is not resistance, not cultural arrogance. It is completion. It fills the missing piece. It brings knowledge into battle, into daily life, into muscle and marrow. It demands that a person turn words into practice. Knowledge is not small, but knowledge only becomes great when a spirit stands behind it. A spirit that tolerates pain, keeps promises, executes without hesitation, rises beyond ego. That spirit is Yamato Damashii. Sitting under the pine tree, Tatayoshi realized he never lacked knowledge. He lacked the spirit that turns knowledge into power. And from that day forward, he finally understood a truth that took 100 days to touch. Knowledge alone does not save anyone. Only knowledge that is acted upon does. Knowledge with flesh and bone. Knowledge that keeps walking even when the body wants to fall. Knowledge is the shell. Yamato Damashii is the heart beating inside that shell. When the two merge, a warrior is born. Part Chin, applying it to modern life. Practical discipline for today. After all the lessons of Ninpo, Yamato Damashii, discipline, duty, and Tatayoshi's rebirth, the deepest teaching was not found in sword forms or in the forest. It was found in life itself, where each person must confront themselves every single day. Ninpo doesn't just train someone to become a warrior, it trains someone to become the strongest version of who they truly are. And how do we bring these ancient principles into the modern world? Not with slogans, not with loud declarations, but with simple rules that shape daily decisions. Don't declare actions, declare identity. Most people fail not because they lack willpower, but because they try to perform big actions while keeping the identity of their old self. Tomorrow I'll start going to the gym, next week I'll wake up early. From today I'll change. These are promises of action, but action is fragile. Identity is unbreakable. A person truly changes and they say, I am someone who trains every day. I am someone who finishes what needs to be done. I am someone who does not quit. Not I will do, but I am someone who does. Identity pulls action forward. Effortlessly, naturally, consistently. Hate is non-negotiable. Emotions negotiate. Willpower negotiates. Motivation negotiates. Laziness negotiates not. But duty doesn't ask hired. It doesn't wait for inspiration. It doesn't care whether you feel like it. Duty only has one command. It's time. Do it. A person who applies Ninpo to modern life is someone who knows. Important tasks. Done immediately first. Critical tasks. Never delayed. Duty doesn't require motion, only execution. Accept discomfort to break the comfort loop. Modern life traps people inside a soft velvet circle. Comfort, convenience, ease, entertainment. But all real progress lies outside that circle, where there is embarrassment, fatigue, mistakes, tension, pressure. Pain is not the enemy. Pain is the price of upgrading yourself. Muscles grow through pain. Wisdom deepens through mistakes. Resilience forms through challenges. Discipline strengthens through resistance to ease. Not everyone crosses the comfort circle. Too soft, but softness is exactly what keeps people stuck. Knowledge is useless without action. Some read hundreds of books on success. Some watch thousands of motivational videos. Some write long journals of future plans. Yet nothing changes, because knowledge is only valuable when it is used through action. Not learn more, but do more. Not understand deeply, but execute consistently. Not study widely, but practice one principle relentlessly. Knowledge doesn't make anyone stronger, action does. Consistency, intensity. Intensity burns bright. Consistency never stops burning. Intense people start like a shooting arrow. Fast, fiery, brilliant, but they burn out quickly. Consistent people are like flowing water. Quiet, steady, persistent, and over time they carve mountains. 10 minutes every day beats 3 hours once, then quitting for 10 days. One step each day beats one leap followed by collapse. Great victories belong not to those who start strong, but to those who continues. The final secret, strategic rest. A lazy rest. In Ninpo, rest is a technique, not an excuse. Strategic rest means resting after duties are completed, resting to recover, resting to prepare for harder tasks, resting to maintain long-term rhythm, resting to prevent burnout. Lazy rest means resting to avoid difficulty, resting because of not feeling like it, resting before start procrastinate, resting to indulge temporary emotion. These two types of rest create two very different lives. One builds and carries it. Final message. The ultimate transformation in the end. Ninpo does not ask, did you do the thing? It asks, are you the kind of person who does the thing? Anyone can try for a few days. Only those who transform identity sustain it for life. It's not you did it. You are the kind of person who does it. In the end, after this entire journey, there is one truth that Tatayoshi Ko and every ancient warrior wanted to pass down. You don't need to become stronger, you just need to become more consistent. Willpower fades, emotion fluctuate, motivation disappears. But duty, when carved into your identity, will carry you through every storm. Yamato Damashii never taught extremism. Clarity about who you are, clarity about what you've declared, clarity about the life you choose to build. You cannot build a resilient life on temporary inspiration, but you can build everything if you know who you are, and live as that person every single day. Not how do I take action, but rather I'm the kind of person who cannot not act not. I will try to do this, but this is who I am. And when identity becomes the foundation, action becomes natural. When duty becomes the standard, life becomes disciplined. When self-negotiation ends, you become the version of yourself you once only dreamed about. If you've listened this far, it means you already have something most people don't. A soul ready to change. Protect that spark. Use it to step in tomorrow, not driven by emotion but guided by identity. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next video on life philosophy, where we don't chase motivation, we build character.